I thought I was just knocking on my friend's door, but that night, she opened something in me I can't close. The rain was steady that evening, not a storm, just a soft, persistent drizzle that made the world outside blur into muted shades of gray. I stood on the porch, shaking droplets from my jacket, staring at the wooden door I'd knocked on countless times before. But this time felt different, though I couldn't explain why. Maybe it was the silence in the street, or the warm light spilling through the frosted glass panels. When the door opened, I expected to see my friend. Instead, she stood there, his mother. Her presence filled the doorway like a quiet melody. She wore a soft cream cardigan over a loose blouse, her hair tied back casually with a few strands framing her face. Her eyes, warm brown with flecks of amber, landed on me with a gentle spark of surprise, then softened into a knowing smile. "You knocked," she said in a low, playful whisper, stepping slightly closer so her perfume, vanilla with a hint of jasmine, wrapped around me. Her lips curved upward as she finished, "So now you belong to me." She said it with a teasing ease, but something about her tone made my chest tighten. I laughed it off, tucking my hands into my pockets, but her gaze lingered for just a heartbeat longer than expected. Before I could ask where her son was, she stepped aside and motioned me in. "Come in. It's too cold to be standing out there." The moment I crossed the threshold, the atmosphere shifted. The house was warm, not just in temperature, but in presence. The faint scent of baked cinnamon hung in the air, blending with the subtle hum of jazz playing softly from the living room. I handed her my umbrella, and when our fingers brushed, there was a brief spark. Her hand rested lightly on my arm as she placed it in the stand by the door. "He ran out to get something. You can wait inside until he's back," she said, her voice smooth, almost melodic. I followed her into the kitchen where the soft glow of pendant lights reflected off polished wood. She filled the kettle, and the whistle soon became the heartbeat of the room. As she moved, I found myself quietly observing her, not like a friend's mom, but like someone who carried a quiet grace in every step. I sat at the small kitchen table, watching the rain beat against the window, feeling strangely at ease in her presence. She placed a steaming cup of tea before me, her fingers grazing mine again as she set it down. And in that small, rain-wrapped kitchen, something wordless but undeniable began. I had barely taken my first sip of tea when my phone buzzed. A message from my friend lit up the screen. "Got stuck at the store. Might take a while. Just chill at my place, I'll be back later." I stared at the text, then looked up at her. She was leaning against the counter, arms folded lightly, a faint smile playing at her lips as if she already knew. "Looks like it's just the two of us tonight," she said. Her tone was casual, but there was a warmth beneath it, something that made my pulse quicken. She walked over to the cabinet, pulling out a plate of freshly baked cake, simple, homemade, still warm. "I was just about to have some," she said, slicing a piece and placing it in front of me. "You'd be doing me a favor if you joined." The rain outside grew heavier, pattering rhythmically against the windows. The house felt cocooned in that sound, like the world had folded in on itself. She sat opposite me at the kitchen table, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "So," she began softly, "how's life treating you?" It started light, college stories, random frustrations, small jokes, but soon our conversation deepened without either of us pushing it. She asked questions that most people never bothered with, listening fully, her eyes steady on mine. She didn't rush to fill silences. She let them breathe, as if the pauses themselves held meaning. Her presence had a grounding effect. I found myself talking about things I hadn't planned to, how lost I sometimes felt, how life lately felt like walking through fog. She didn't offer clichés. She offered honesty. "That fog never really goes away," she said gently. "You just learn how to walk through it without losing yourself." As she spoke, her voice low and warm, my knee brushed against hers under the table. It was a small accident, but neither of us pulled away immediately. The contact sent a quiet current through me, subtle but alive. The room around us blurred into soft edges, the ticking clock on the wall, the faint hum of the fridge, the rain. Everything outside of that table seemed distant. She laughed at one of my dry remarks, her hand lightly touching my wrist as if to ground the moment. I realized, somewhere between shared cake and quiet honesty, that this wasn't just polite conversation anymore. It was connection, unplanned, unhurried, but real. After the dishes were cleared, she stood and stretched lightly, glancing toward the living room with a soft nostalgia in her eyes. "Come," she said, her voice carrying a warmth that felt like an invitation into a quieter world. "Let me show you something." The living room was softly lit by a single lamp in the corner, casting golden light over the shelves and framed photos. She knelt by the lower cabinet, pulling out a heavy leather-bound album. "These," she said, brushing the dust gently off the cover, "are memories I don't open often." I sat down beside her on the couch, the fabric plush beneath us, our shoulders nearly touching. She opened the album slowly, as though each page held something delicate. The first was filled with photographs of her younger years, smiling with wind-tossed hair, standing proudly at her graduation, holding a baby wrapped in a blue blanket. She laughed quietly at some of the older shots, pointing out fashion disasters and funny expressions. But in between the laughter, there were moments when her fingers lingered on certain pictures, ones where her smile in the photo was bright, but her eyes now softened, tinged with something unspoken. One particular photo made her pause, her younger self standing beside a man with a familiar smile. She didn't explain, but her fingers rested on that image for a moment too long. "Life moves fast," she whispered, almost to herself. Without thinking, I placed my hand lightly over hers. It wasn't planned, it was instinctive. Her fingers didn't pull away, they curled slightly against mine, a quiet acknowledgement. The scent of her perfume drifted between us, warm and floral, intertwining with the faint smell of rain still clinging to my jacket. Her laughter returned when we turned to a page of childhood mischief, her son, my friend, covered in mud. She leaned into me, her shoulder brushing my chest as she shook with genuine amusement. The contact was soft, natural, but it set my heartbeat into a faster rhythm. When she reached for the next page, her hand accidentally brushed against my thigh, a fleeting touch that sent a warm ripple through the quiet room. Neither of us commented. We didn't need to. As the evening deepened, we sat close on that couch, flipping through memories that weren't mine but slowly became part of this shared moment. The album lay open, but the real story was unfolding in the small gestures, the glances, the touches, the spaces between words. And in those spaces, something unspoken began to breathe. The rain outside hadn't stopped, but it had softened into a quiet rhythm against the windows, like a lullaby meant only for the two of us. As the night stretched on, the house grew still. The living room light dimmed to a warm glow, and somewhere between conversation and comfortable silence, the power flickered. A moment later, everything went dark, except for the faint shimmer of candles she began to light one by one. "Looks like the storm finally caught up," she said with a gentle laugh, her face glowing softly in the candlelight. The golden light danced over her features, highlighting every elegant line, the curve of her cheek, the warmth in her eyes. She draped a soft blanket over both of us as we sat back down on the couch, shoulders pressed together beneath the shared warmth. What began as small talk slowly drifted into something deeper. Maybe it was the intimacy of the candlelight, or the way the house seemed to close itself off from the outside world. She spoke first, her voice low and honest. "You know, it's strange," she murmured, fingers tracing the rim of her teacup. "This house is always full of people, yet sometimes, it's never felt emptier." Her words settled between us. I turned slightly toward her, studying the softness in her expression, the kind of vulnerability that people usually hide. "Do you ever feel like you're living more for others than for yourself?" I asked. She exhaled slowly. "Every day," she whispered. "And some nights, when the house goes quiet like this, it hits harder." The honesty in her voice tugged something inside me. It wasn't pity, it was connection. I shifted closer without realizing, and our fingers brushed under the blanket. This time, they didn't drift apart. They stayed there, gently entwined, like two people who had quietly decided not to pretend anymore. She asked about my life, not out of politeness but with genuine interest. I admitted things I hadn't said aloud before, how uncertain I felt about my future, how tired I was of shallow conversations and people who never really listened. She listened intently, her thumb slowly stroking the side of my hand beneath the blanket, grounding me. At one point, she laughed softly at something I said, leaning closer. Her breath warmed the side of my neck, and the scent of her hair, fresh, faintly floral, wrapped around me. Then there was silence. Not awkward, but charged. Candlelight flickered between us, and in that quiet glow, her gaze lingered on me longer than ever before. It wasn't just attraction, it was two people seeing each other clearly for the first time. The clock in the hallway struck midnight, its sound echoing softly through the quiet house. The rain had eased into a delicate mist, tapping gently against the windows. Time had slipped away unnoticed, wrapped in conversation and candlelight. When she glanced at the clock, a faint look of surprise crossed her face. "It's late," she murmured, her voice warm but carrying a touch of hesitation. "You should probably head home before it gets worse out there." I stood slowly, reluctant to break the cocoon the night had wrapped around us. She walked me to the door, the soft glow from the hallway lights painting the space in gold and shadow. The air between us felt heavier now, not uncomfortable, just full. Full of everything unsaid. She reached for the umbrella by the door and handed it to me, her fingers brushing mine in the exchange. That single touch carried a warmth that lingered long after. I thanked her softly, but neither of us moved immediately. We just stood there, facing each other in the quiet entryway, close enough to hear each other's breaths. Her eyes searched mine with a kind of thoughtful intensity, as if weighing something silently. She took a small step closer. The faint scent of her perfume wrapped around me again, this time stronger, more intimate. She reached up to fix the collar of my jacket, an unnecessary gesture, really, but her hand stayed against the fabric, resting against my chest for a heartbeat too long. I felt my breath catch. Her touch wasn't rushed or playful anymore, it was gentle, deliberate, almost hesitant. My hand instinctively lifted, brushing lightly against hers. The moment froze. The world outside the door faded, the rain, the night, everything. All that remained was the quiet space between us. Her gaze flickered from my eyes to my lips and back again. For a second, it felt like the line between us might dissolve completely. My pulse was loud in my ears, and the house felt impossibly still. Then she exhaled softly and took a small step back. The warmth of her hand left my chest, replaced by the cool air of the hallway. "Good night," she whispered, her voice barely above the rain. There was a softness to it, like a promise held back. I nodded, unable to trust my voice. As I stepped out into the misty night, I glanced back once. She was still standing there in the doorway, one hand resting against the frame, watching me leave with a look that said everything words couldn't. It wasn't a goodbye. It was a pause. A heartbeat caught between two choices neither of us was ready to make. The following days felt strangely hollow, as if the world had dimmed just slightly. I tried to distract myself, work, friends, endless scrolling, but everything circled back to that quiet doorway, her eyes holding mine, her hand resting against my chest. The memory wasn't loud, it was persistent. A quiet rhythm beneath everything else. By the fourth evening, I found myself standing outside her house again, book in hand, the one she'd lent me weeks earlier, the excuse I told myself I needed. The rain had stopped, leaving the air cool and clear, the pavement glistening under the soft streetlights. My hand hesitated before I knocked. And just like before, she opened the door. This time, there was no surprise on her face. Only that calm, unreadable warmth. "You came back," she said softly, as if she'd known I would. I held up the book with a half-smile. "I figured you might want this back." She laughed quietly, stepping aside. I knew you'd finish it faster than you said. Her voice carried something different now, a quiet acknowledgement, a shared understanding that neither of us needed to name. The house smelled just as it had that night, vanilla, cinnamon, and something uniquely hers. But the atmosphere felt changed, less like accidental company and more like a choice we'd both made without saying it aloud. She made tea again, this time without asking. We sat in the living room, a soft instrumental song playing in the background. The conversation started light but didn't stay there for long. There were no storms outside this time, no power flickers or blankets. Just the two of us, facing what had been quietly building. She set her cup down and looked at me with an openness that made my chest tighten. I've thought about that night, she said finally, her voice steady but soft. More than I probably should have. My fingers tightened around my cup. Me too, I admitted. Every day since. There was no nervous laughter this time, no pretending. She leaned back slightly, exhaling like someone releasing a truth they'd been holding too long. This isn't simple, she murmured. It's not supposed to happen like this. I shifted closer, my voice lower now. Maybe not. But it did. Her hand found mine on the couch, slowly, deliberately. The touch was different from before, not hesitant, not accidental. It was quiet acceptance. Her thumb brushed against my skin in soft, rhythmic strokes, and for a moment, we just sat there in that shared honesty. No rain. No storm. Just clarity. Two people no longer avoiding the truth that had been growing quietly between them. The evening air carried that soft, late autumn chill, the kind that nips gently at your skin but smells clean, like damp earth and fading leaves. She had suggested a walk in the garden behind her house, something quiet and grounding after the weight of what had been said inside. I agreed, though my heart was still racing from the conversation. The garden was dimly lit by a few lanterns hanging from the wooden fence, their light swaying gently with the breeze. We walked slowly, side by side, our hands brushing occasionally, neither of us rushing to make the next move. The night sky stretched open above us, silent except for the soft rustle of leaves and the distant sound of a passing car. For a while, we didn't speak. There was a kind of peace in simply walking together, as though the silence itself was weaving the next part of the story. Finally, she stopped near a small stone bench beneath a tree. She sat first, smoothing her cardigan over her knees, and looked up at me with eyes that held both strength and hesitation. Us, she began softly, it scares me a little. Her hands were folded in her lap, fingers intertwined tightly. People talk. They always do. And I've spent so many years, doing what was expected. I sat beside her, close enough that our shoulders touched lightly. I know, I said quietly. But this doesn't feel wrong. She looked at me for a long moment, as if searching for doubt and finding none. I've spent so much time being strong for everyone else, she whispered. And then you knocked on my door that night, and suddenly I wasn't just a mother or a host. I was, me. And that terrified me. Her voice trembled slightly on that last word. Without thinking, I reached for her hand. She didn't resist. Her fingers slid into mine as though they'd been waiting for the space all along. We sat like that, hand in hand under the soft lantern light. A breeze passed through, and she shivered slightly. I wrapped an arm gently around her, pulling her closer. She rested her head against my shoulder, and the world seemed to narrow down to the warmth between us. After a moment, she whispered, almost like a secret meant only for the night, you knocked, so now you belong to me. But this time, her voice wasn't playful. It was soft, real, like a truth she had finally allowed herself to speak. I turned slightly toward her, meeting her eyes in the dim light. There was no hesitation left. Just quiet understanding. I squeezed her hand gently and smiled. I know, I whispered back. And there, in that quiet garden, with lanterns swaying and hearts steady, it didn't feel like a risk anymore. It felt like belonging.